project were built on the Chicago area project. And they all focus on preventing delinquency by getting lots of agencies and the community involved. So there's a lot we can learn by reading about those. I won't go into that today, the success and failure of those efforts, but they're really classic ones. Now in the anti-drug and anti-violence area, which are largely criminal justice-based partnerships, I've been involved in evaluating a bunch of these. Deanna and I actually evaluated the first one on the community responses to drug abuse in the 1990s. Really community organizations in 10 cities working with law enforcement and others to try to stop the street-level violence and street-level drug marketing, basically, because drug marketing was the biggest focus of the early 1990s. Lessons from that, I mean, it was interesting. They did work together pretty well. But there were struggles. It was the first time I began to realize that they had different, that the community groups and the government bureaucrats had different ways of organizing and working together. The government folks in the meetings always wanted to have a strategic kind of long-term view, and let's talk about this over and over. And the community organizers, no, tomorrow, what are you going to do tomorrow? It was kind of like we had this different, it was very interesting, let's solve the problem right now. And there was some posturing and headbutting and things that went on. I've learned more about what that is now. The Comprehensive Communities program in like 16 cities, that was a very fascinating effort we did. George Kelly, Muskog, and myself, a few other people. That was really comprehensive service delivery. The government, all these, by the way, are government funded through the Justice Department. So that's an interesting footnote itself. But that, they really insisted that the community groups take the lead role in that, not the justice agencies. And then it was comprehensive. There I got to see the different philosophies play out clearly, where even probation officers have a much different theory about what causes youth to be difficult than police officers. And the community organizations, the school officials, and the social workers each have their own models. And so they have different views of the world. Now, one of the things we did a network analysis. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's like we ask each of the participants in all the cities to say, who do you hang out with in the partnership? How often do you talk to these individuals? Daily, weekly? And we mapped this in three-dimensional space. And so basically, there were clusters. People hang together of similar birds of a feather hang together. The probation officer was more likely to hang with them and with the community group. But we found what Jack Hines wrote a book called The Hollow Core, which is about how if you map them all, it looks like a donut. There's an empty core in the middle. There's nobody running the show, which actually is a good thing in a way, right? Because we want equality of power and all that sharing. But it turns out that I'm going to tell you today that leadership is really important in these things. And so the more traditional model, of course, is like a wheel with spokes and a hub, and the hub communicates with everybody like that. But you want one where they're communicating among themselves as well, and not just with the central leader. That's like an autocrat who's running everything, keeping everybody separate. You do want people to communicate with each other, but you also need leadership. That's really important. How many of you here know of Weed and Seed? Most of you. Weed and Seed grew from a couple of programs that were evaluated in the early 90s to over 200 programs now. It's run by the U.S. Attorney's Office, but it is a partnership. It's an agricultural analogy, right? The weeding out of the bad kids in the neighborhood, followed by the seeding of the neighborhood with social services. We learned a lot from those evaluations as well. I'll come back to some of the summaries of that, but you know, the law enforcement people, Weed and Seed was the federal, state, local, all levels. The law enforcement people got along very well. The prosecution folks did not. The feds didn't. The local prosecutors were not happy with the feds. They felt they were not including them in decision making and not doing all the work. Most of the work is done by the local prosecutors. And the biggest problem with the Weed and Seed program that's most important for you, and for those of you that care about community and service and prevention, is that the seeding wasn't the priority by the people leading these Weed and Seed programs, at least in the first 10 years. And that means that only $1 out of $4 went to the seeding. 3 out of 4 went to weeding. How surprising, right? Okay. The more recent ones, we did a national evaluation a few years back of the Strategic Approaches to Community Safety Initiative, which in 10 cities, That was run out of the U.S. Attorney's Office, but really was a partnership in a lot of ways. This one's different and interesting because the researchers had a key role. We included researchers as an important element of the Justice Department. That led to Project Safe Neighborhoods. I bet you everybody in the room's heard of Project Safe Neighborhoods. So that's in all 93 U.S. Jurisdictions for the federal government, for the U.S. Attorney's Office. But this approach, we learned a lot from that. I'll come back to that because I wanted the whole planning model. Let me go quickly about some of the factors we've learned from these evaluations. So, what makes a successful partnership? They have a history of funding and a network of organization in place. Well, I hate to say this, but the rich get richer. It's kind of like if you or practice makes perfect or something. But the sites that had done something like this previously were better organized and the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, right? So it's like they had done some things before. What are the lessons here? You need a good grant writer. That helps. You need to, and that's where researchers can be helpful. The ones that were more successful faced a limited presence of intractable violence problems such as gangs. If you have problems like we do in Chicago with deep-seated gangs and poverty that have been there forever, it's very tough to break that cycle. The ones that were sort of on the margins, and you may have more communities like that in Columbus that there's some gang activity, there's some neighborhoods that are on the, those are easier to deal with. In near commercial areas with potential for economic development, and working with more stable, less transient neighborhoods. That's the same point I was just making. They're also more successful when you concentrate on a narrowly defined target population or area. The ones that took on the whole city, they just didn't have as much effect. They were spreading their resources too thin. Leveraging other resources is also related to success. Can you get other entities, other agencies, other participants in the partnership, as Deanna was talking about? Build trust in the community and buy-in. If you don't have the community involved, you can forget it. Have strong leadership. I want to come back to that. Have the right mix of weeding and seeding. We used to think you had to weed out the problems and have one. It's kind of like a war strategy. You stabilize the area first before you don't have to do that. You need to start seeding right away. You don't wait till the weeding is done. Lessons about membership. This is really important. Who should be in the partnership? Law enforcement and local government tend to be overrepresented. Community members and leaders are usually underrepresented in these studies. Social service agencies underrepresented, schools underrepresented, universities and researchers underrepresented, as well as other groups. So, something to think about there. Who should be at the table? You have to decide. There's just lots of possibilities here. I just realized something this morning, so I'm glancing at this. Keep the media in mind. If you really are interested in public education and changing norms and stuff, they should be at the table too. Let me put in an unabashed plug for researchers here, because the SACSI project, if you're really going to do a strategic planning and problem-solving approach, they have potential to contribute in various ways. Collect and analyze data to help define the target problems right up front. There's general analyses that I've seen researchers do in a number of sites. Where's the violence problem? What times of day does it occur? Who are the offenders? What are their characteristics? Just basic stuff about the problem. That's a good start. Then there's much more specific stuff, like the stuff that Deanna, Wilkinson, and others are doing about what is the nature of the violence problem during interpersonal encounters? What escalates to lead to violence between? What's the dynamics of those relationships? I'm actually trying to get the police now through retraining them to not escalate violence during encounters, so that they feel disrespected just like you feel disrespected. So are you dissing me? So I'm going to be tough with you. So we're trying to get that stuff dealt with the new recruits. They can provide data that on best practices. Researchers know that what's been tried elsewhere, what works and what doesn't work. Why reinvent the wheel if this isn't going to work? Why keep doing the DARE program the same way? Okay. And Chicago still does DARE. I'm going to ask the mayor and the superintendent next time I see them about why they do that after I've been telling them for years. That's a whole other debate, about discussion about research, why we don't respect research. Monitor strategy implementation, evaluate. Any learning organization, whether it's a new partnership or an existing,